Hello, everyone. I'm making this little video here, which is about how to make parts in Finale. In this department, a lot of music gets written, which means a lot of parts need to be made. And um, while this is not the most exciting and intellectually stimulating part of the composition process, it is unfortunately very important. If you give a performer a part that looks sloppy, they're more likely to give you a sloppy performance. Conversely, if you give your performer a part that is clean and clear, that you clearly put a lot of effort into, they're going to take you more seriously and are more likely to put effort into practicing the part, which is always good. Because one thing that's can be a little unnerving about composing is that once you've written the piece, it's kind of out of your hands. So it's totally up to the performer. Um, you want to do all that you can to make them want to practice your part. So let's dive in. And in the description, I have categories of things labeled, so feel free to jump ahead to the parts that are most relevant. If you're new to this, then watch the whole video. All right, here's a piece. This is an orchestral score. It's not technically finished, but we're going to pretend that it's finished. So when you're working with a score, when you're composing, you generally are displaying things in concert pitch, because right, a lot of instruments are transposing and you don't want to have to do all that transposing in your head while you're composing. But when you're making the parts, it's about making it pretty for the performer. So at this point, we're going to uncheck display in concert pitch. So now everything is in the key that the part is going to be. All right, so if we go up to document again, right now edit score is checked, and then to edit a part, we're going to go down here to edit part, and we're going to work on this clarinet part. So it should be the case that the same file that you're working on the score is the one that you're creating the parts from. In the olden days, you used to kind of have to create a separate document for the parts, and then you change one thing here, and then the parts wouldn't change, and it was kind of a mess. But now you can all do it within one document. So if I change something in the part here, right, it will automatically change in the score and vice versa. For things like moving things around, like if I want to move this, now it's in yellow, which means that I think there are certain things that don't change, which is like, kind of like adjustments like that, kind of, kind of minor layout things that won't change between the parts in the score. And when there's something that's different between the part and the score, it'll appear yellow like that. See, when it's green, that means that it's, no adjustments. And you can left click on it and click remove manual adjustment, and that'll put it back to where it was. But yeah, notes and rhythms, if you change one in a part, it'll change it in the score and vice versa. Okay, so the first thing to do is to resize. 100%, it feels a little bit like a kid's book where everything is like font 40 bajillion. So I resize my pages to 90%, which, it may kind of look small here, but once you print it out, I think it looks better. Next, creating and the order that you do all of these things in, for the most part, doesn't matter a ton. But so we're going to create some multi-measure rests here. So I'm going to, just with my selection tool, I'm going to push Command A or Control A on Windows. That'll highlight everything. I'm going to right click and then push Create. And now we have multi-measure rests. this is the standard for part writing. You never want to have more than one measure of rest. Even if it's 2 measures, you still want to create a multi-measure rest. Another thing that's not necessarily always standard, but is super helpful and should be standard, is having the measure ranges of the multi-measure rests. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a second here. So go to the measure tool, which just looks like a measure with a whole rest in it. Go to the measure menu at the top, and then edit measure number regions. Now check both of these 2 boxes, show on multi-measure rests and show measure ranges on multi-measure rests, and push OK. Now, right, it says, that this 6 measure rest is measure 6 to 11. So sometimes a conductor will say, all right, let's start from measure 8. All right, ready and go. And I know whenever I'm in rehearsal, my pea brain can't figure out when it's in the middle of a multi-measure rest, what measure, how many measures of rest I still need to be counting, and then I come in wrong. Which can be avoided by having this. I can just go, okay, 8, 2, 3, 4, 9, 2, 3, 4, 10, 2, 3, 4, 11, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, da. And that's especially the case when there are letters, rehearsal letters instead of numbers. Speaking of rehearsal numbers and letters, these are already in here, but I'll show you how to do them. And this is something that you want to go back to editing the score for. I'm going to erase this here for a second. So rehearsal letters and numbers are really important for rehearsals, so that somebody can say, all right, let's start in measure A, or so, let's start at A, or let's start at measure 56. So the way you do that is you go to the expression tool, and then you double click on the measure that you want to put it in and go to rehearsal marks. And here you can select either a rehearsal letter or rehearsal number, or this one is a measure number in a box. And it looks like that. And then when you go into the part, right, it'll appear here. Generally, I would suggest either rehearsal letters or the measure number in a box. If you use rehearsal numbers like this, they're usually in a circle. Then it can be a little confusing when somebody says, all right, let's start back at number 10. And then some people there will inevitably somebody who says, is that measure 10 or rehearsal 10? And then it's just kind of waste time. So I kind of advise against the rehearsal numbers. And again, if you want to use the measure number in a box and you want to assign that to a hotkey, let's pick N. With the expression tool selected, press Shift and then N, and then assign, and then by clicking measure number here, that assigns the letter N to the measure number in a box. So now I can just hold down N, click, click, right, click, wherever. Usually you don't want to mix and match like letters and numbers. I suppose you can, but it's kind of not standard. You want to have them every 6 to 12 measures. You're going to want to put a rehearsal marking. But more is better than fewer in general. Another thing you want to make sure of is if you have any sort of atmospheric words. For example, I want to mark this section as ominously majestic. So, one might think, oh, I'll just go technique text and then put ominously majestic. Ta-da! Except what happens is, right, this will only appear in the flute part, right? Here's ominously majestic. It won't appear in any other parts. Right, here's our clarinet part. No ominously majestic. So the way to, what we need to do is we select the expression tool, we double click, and so with technique texts, these only appear in the part that you put them in the score. So what I'm going to do is go to edit categories, and then I'm going to go to tempo marks and then duplicate that, and then put mood words, whatever, because tempo marks are such that they'll appear in whatever staff you select in the score, but then they'll also appear in every part. Okay, so I'm going to create this category and push OK. And then I'm going to create a mood word, ominously majestic, push OK, sign. So now it'll say it just on the top staff of the score, but then it will appear in all of the parts. Okay, cues. Cues are pretty important, especially if your piece is not going to get a ton of rehearsal time. They make things way easier for the performer. There are two types of cues. Okay, so cues are kind of little notes that are from a different instrument in an instrument part. And here I'll create this one quickly here. So I'm going to take this bassoon solo and go to plugins, scoring and arranging, and then add cue notes and put it in the clarinet. Okay, so now in the clarinet part, there is this bassoon solo. So there are two types of cues, or they look the same, but cues can have one of two functions. One is if there is an instrument that is not very common, you can put cues in a similar instrument that can play that part if the original instrument is not available. For example, let's say that I'm writing a wind ensemble piece and there's a soprano saxophone solo, but not every wind ensemble may have a soprano saxophone. Most will, but some might not. And I don't want that to be a limiting factor in getting the piece performed. I don't want them to go, oh, well, we don't have a soprano sax, so we can't perform this piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a cue in maybe the clarinet or the alto sax, so that if they don't have a soprano sax, the clarinet or the alto sax will already have it in their part, and then they can just play that solo. And for these types of cues, these should appear in the score, so that the conductor knows which instruments have the cue in their part, and can make that decision. They can say, okay, I see that it's cued in the alto sax and the clarinet. I want it to, let's say my clarinet is better than my alto sax player, or whatever, or I just like the clarinet, think that the clarinet would sound better at it. So they can say, all right, clarinet player, please play the soprano saxophone cues. This example is the other kind of cue, which is, the clarinet and the bassoon are, somewhat quite different sounding instruments, and any orchestra is going to have a bassoon. So for this cue is when you have a lot of measures of rest, it's a good idea to have kind of like the melody of whoever has the melody right before an entrance. So right there was like 11 measures of rest here. So if the clarinet loses count or gets lost in counting rests, then they can listen for this bassoon solo and kind of follow along, and then they can come in. These are hugely helpful to the performers. When I get a part that doesn't have cues in it, I spend a lot of time writing these cues into my part by looking at the score. So this really just saves the performers a lot of time for the ones who really care, and for the ones who don't care enough to put cues in their part, it prevents them from coming in correctly to a degree. Okay. So going back at the score here, for that second type of cue that's just kind of for the performer's convenience, these should not appear in the score, because you might get quite a few cues. In fact, it's good to really put a cue for anything longer than 6 bars of rest, which for brass and percussion can be quite a few cues, which I recommend doing. And when like 12 instruments all have the same cue, it can just get a little bit, the score can get a little cluttered and overwhelming for the conductor with all of these cues. So you don't want these cues to appear in the full score. So we have to hide them. And the way to do that is with a function called staff styles. So what the cue is that all it did was it took this bassoon line, shrunk it to 75%, and put it in layer 4. So what we're going to do is go to the staff tool, then go up to the staff menu. Actually, whoops, sorry. What we're going to do is highlight this cue, and then right click, and then apply staff style, and then go down to current part score, because we only want to hide it in the score, right? We don't want to hide it in the part as well, because then that would defeat the purpose. So go to current part score, and then go down to number 19 that says blank notation with rests, layer 4. Okay, and now our cue is hidden in the score, but appears in the clarinet part, which was our goal. One thing that's a little weird though is that we have this random tenor clef here, right? Because the original bassoon solo is in tenor clef. So what we're going to do is go to the clef tool, and just change it to treble clef with our hotkey, which is 1. This changed it in both of them, however, and oops, that's the bass clarinet part. So now there's kind of a bunch of ledger lines here. So sometimes, we could just leave this in treble clef, but for the sake of showing you how to do it, let's say that you wanted to put this back in tenor clef. Let's say like the ledger lines, it was just way too many ledger lines, or especially if if this bassoon solo was an octave lower, which is totally in range, you wouldn't want to have this cue in treble clef. So what you do is apply another staff style. So you click on the staff menu, and now you have to go to define staff styles. And we want to create a new staff style, and we're going to call this tenor clef. And then we're going to go under the appearance category. We're going to check transposition, even though it's not transposition. I don't know why it's not its own option, but select and then set to clef, and then go to tenor clef and push OK. So now we have the cue selected. Select cue, right click, and then apply staff styles to current score parts, right? Because we only want to do it on the current, we only want to do it on the part, not on the score as well. And then tenor clef should be selected, and then we push OK, and now it's back to tenor clef. But in the score, it's still in treble clef. So a little bit convoluted, I know, but these are the little details that will you know, that when you do them, they really show your performers that you know what you're doing and that you're a fucking pro. So excuse my French. All right. So now we have those cues there. So our next topic is going to be for when you have an instrument, a part that changes instruments. So a lot of times you might have an, second oboe, or in an orchestra, second oboe switches off between oboe and English horn, or clarinet and bass clarinet, flute and piccolo, bassoon and contrabassoon. It's not uncommon in an orchestra, and also in, you see that especially with more common ones like piccolo and English horn in, woodwind quintets as well. So this also kind of involves a lot. So we're going to look at this bassoon 2 / contrabassoon part. And I actually already have done all the work, so I'm going to undo it so that I can show you how to do it. All right. In order to change it to begin with in Finale, you go to Utilities and then Change Instrument. And then, I'm going to select contrabassoon. And then that'll make it, the right tone color so that on the playback it sounds like, what Finale thinks the contrabassoon sounds like. It'll also then put it in the right transposition, all that stuff. And then if you want to switch it back to bassoon 2, go back to Utilities, change instrument, and then select bassoon. It is, of course, very important that you specify that the player needs to switch instrument. So I'm going to go to my expression tool, create a technique text that says switch to contrabassoon, or just to contrabassoon. It's good enough. Okay, so then the player knows, okay, right after this F sharp here, I have a little bit of time. I have these, 4 measures of rest to switch to contra. It is very important that you give the player time to switch instruments, especially for the larger ones, clarinet to bass clarinet, bassoon to contrabassoon. Flute to piccolo is kind of easy because they can just put the flute in their lap and pick up the piccolo from their lap. Can't quite do that with some of the larger instruments. So now, when the contrabassoon comes in, I'm going to create another technique text that says contrabassoon, and I like to put it in an enclosure in a rectangle. So I'm going to select enclosure shape rectangle, push OK, and then assign. And then now it's super clear that, all right, we're switching to contrabassoon, and then we come in with contrabassoon. Okay, so a few other things. In the score, it is pretty helpful for the conductor, right? If they just flip to this page, it's not clear whether this person is playing bassoon 2 or contrabassoon, right? Like on the first page, we want to put bassoon 2 contrabassoon so that the conductor knows that this person is switching between instruments. But if you flip to a random page, they have no idea which instrument they're playing at that time. And it's really helpful for them to specify that. So what we're going to do is create another staff style. So we're going to go to the staff tool, staff menu, define staff styles. We're going to create a new staff style. Let's call it contrabassoon. And what this staff style will do is change the abbreviation name to CBSM, the standard abbreviation for contrabassoon. Okay, so I just checked abbreviated staff name, push edit, and then type that in. Now for this area where they're playing the contra, I'm going to highlight all of this and then right click, and then apply staff style to, and for this I'm going to select score and parts, which we'll get to later. And then I already created these staff styles, but okay, I'm going to select contrabassoon, and now right on this staff it says CBSM. So if the conductor flips to this page, they'll know that the second bassoonist is playing contra there. And similarly, I'm going to define staff styles, new, bassoon 2, and then check abbreviation name, edit, bassoon 2, press OK. And now for the area that they're playing bassoon 2, except for the first measure, right? Because I want the first system to say bassoon 2 / contrabassoon. I'm going to say apply staff styles to score and parts, and then click on bassoon 2 and push OK. So now when they're playing this bassoon 2, it'll say bassoon 2, and then when they're playing contrabassoon, it'll say CBSM. So going to the part, generally generally it won't say which instrument it is on each staff, because usually it's just one instrument the whole time. But it's actually really helpful for performers, so that when the conductor says, all right, let's start at measure 12, they don't have to look around for the instrument in a box to see which one they have to play. So what we're going to do in the part is with the staff tool, right click on the handle for the staff, select edit staff attributes, and then under items to display, select staff name in parts. See, so now in the beginning it says bassoon 2 / contra, and then on each staff it says what instrument they're playing at any given time. This is not something that you necessarily always see on parts, but ever since I've started doing this, I've gotten rave reviews from performers who said that this is actually really, really, really helpful. So I highly recommend you do it. Okay. Next is talking about if you're doing a large ensemble. And so this applies to when you have a staff in the score that has multiple instruments, right? So I have trombone 1 and 2 on the staff, but you want separate parts for that. So if you just have one instrument on a staff, you can skip this section and go to the next section. If you're working with a larger ensemble that has this, then pay attention. So it's really good to, when you're working with a larger ensemble, it's good to have multiple instruments of the same type on one staff, because then right, so for these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, for these 8 brass players, I have 4 staves, and that just means that I have fewer staves on the score, which means that they can be bigger, which means that they're easier to read for the conductor. And usually if they're the same instrument, they're kind of playing together a lot of the time anyway. So yeah, you generally should have multiple instruments of the same type on one staff. However, there are some exceptions to that. If one of the instruments is switching off between an auxiliary instrument, like our bassoon 2 contrabassoon, you're going to want them to have their own staff, because once somebody's switching instruments, it just gets too messy and it's unclear who's switching to what and who's playing what when. So in that instance, you want to have separate staves. Also, if it's a smaller ensemble like brass quintet, which has 2 trumpets, you don't you don't need to put both trumpets on one staff because it's only 5 staves anyway. So this is more for large ensembles where you're dealing with 20, 30 staves. Okay, but even though these two trombones are on the same staff in a score, you're going to want to give them separate parts. Especially in orchestra, it's very much frowned upon to put multiple instruments into one part, unless you have kind of like 2 staves on that one part, which can be okay, but it just makes the part very long. That's common in French music. So yeah, you're generally want to give them separate parts. So the way to do that is you go up to Document, and then you have to go to Manage Parts. All right, which gives you this menu, and then click on Edit Part Definition. And here on the left, it has all of your parts, and then on the right is all of the staves. So I want 2 trombone parts here, one for first trombone and one for second trombone. So I'm going to create a new part, and then edit part name, put trombone 2, and then I'm going to take this trombone 1 and 2, edit part name, and make this trombone 1. Okay, so now for trombone 1, right, we have the trombone staff. So I'm going to go to Edit Voicing, and then check Selected Notes from 1 or more layers. Here, to back up a minute, right? So if I go to the trombone part here, right, we have both trombones. And then so by doing what I'm about to do, it will make it so that oh shoot, I clicked cancel instead of okay, so I have to redo this. It'll make it so that we have 2 parts, one with just the top notes and one with just the bottom notes. So I'm going to go to Edit Voicing. So I have trombone 1 and 2 here. Edit Voicing, Selected Notes from 1 or more layers. So in measures containing a single layer, display the top notes. So right, if we look here, it's only going to grab the top notes when there's multiple notes in the same layer. In measures containing multiple layers, right, like this one, display layer 1. So now I'm going to go to trombone 2, grab the trombone staff, add to part. Now edit voicing, selected notes from 1 or more layers. In measures containing a single layer, display the bottom notes. In measures containing multiple layers, display layer 2, and then push OK. So now I have a trombone 1 part, which just has the top notes and layer 1 if there are multiple layers, and my trombone 2 part has all of the bottom notes, and when there were multiple layers, they're layer 2. And I guess it created multi-measure rests for me automatically. Note that list layer 2, when you go to print it out, it will appear in black ink, not red. And same thing with the dynamics and the tempo and the rehearsal numbers and all that. Okay, so that's how you create multiple parts from the same staff. So I would do this for the flutes, horn, all 4 horns, both trumpets. Yeah, or I guess no, I have flute 2 piccolo, so they're already on 2 staves anyway. Okay, so now so you've done all of that stuff. We are getting close. Let's go back to our clarinet part here that we've been working on. So now we're going to work on some proofreading. So smushed notes. Sometimes you might get a measure that is squished, like when we first created this cue, it was all smushed. It kind of resolved itself. But the way to fix that is with the selection tool, highlight the measure and just push 4. And that will automatically space things out 99 times out of 100 in a way that is satisfactory. Right, here's another thing. This tremolo is colliding with this sharp. Oh, 4 doesn't work. So I guess here's our 1 out of 100 times. So what I'm going to do is go to the measure tool, which for every measure that has a notes in it, there is going to be 2 handles on the right side of that measure. I'm going to click on the bottom one, and then for each note, it gives me 2 sets of handles with a line connecting to them. You can click and drag the bottom set of handles to move the note. So I'm going to move the note here. Unfortunately, that didn't affect the tremolo. But well, that's in any case the manual way to move notes, and then you can use the top handle to make the measure larger or smaller. But this is still not great. So what I'm going to do is go to the Special Tools menu, which it looks like a wrench. I'm going to go to the Note Position tool. That still doesn't do it. So this is another way to manually move notes. What I can do is go to the Accidental Mover tool, click on the measure, click on the handle, and I can move this accidental. Okay, now accidental is colliding with the note. Let's see if I can get it right in between. Okay, that's satisfactory. I don't know why this one was all messed up and not that one, but I think that should do. That's good enough for me. Okay. Dynamics. Want to make sure, just kind of scan through and make sure that all of your entrances have a dynamic. And that's not a hard and fast rule, but just generally speaking, right? So I noticed that this solo here doesn't have a dynamic, so I'm going to put a piano in there. This, put a dynamic in there. Okay, and now we're good. Watch out for any collisions. Right, a lot of times rehearsal numbers are going to collide with stuff. Okay, here we have a slur colliding with a tie. So I'm going to use the handles for the slur to fix that. Right, this could use a little more space. This rest is kind of in the way of this cue. So I'm going to move that. That kind of messed things up. Put that back up there. You also want to make sure that you don't have, right, like this line only has 2 measures and it looks kind of weird. So I might there's 2 ways to fix this. I might, put these down here so it's a little more even, or it's okay if the last thing is a multi-measure rest like that, to have that be its own line. But you definitely don't want like this, which is something I see a lot in student compositions, where there's like 2 measures per line, and it's just kind of hard to read, right? Because you can't use your peripheral vision to see what note is coming ahead. So make sure that all of your measures are kind of all of your systems are sort of evenly spaced. Oh, and I guess putting these few measures down here actually alleviated this issue. So that was another indirect way to fix that. Slurs. So and this is just kind of in the all under the category of kind of doing extra proofreading. Some of these types of things, you should have done when you were still working on the score, but sometimes it's easier to see them when you're working with just the part. So slurs, I want to make sure that right in wind parts you never want to have a slur with repeated notes in the middle, right? Because a slur for wins means that they are not to rearticulate the note. Remember, articulating a note means that they're saying kind of two into their instrument, which puts a little teeny tiny accent on the note. Slur is saying don't articulate the note, but right, we have two of the same notes and there's no tie here. So this is kind of a contradiction. It's unclear whether this note is supposed to be rearticulated or not. So make sure that, right, we have it like this. And then for when there's a tied note, if you're slurring to a tied note, we want to make sure that it includes the tie. So that it goes here like that. And if this were slurring, if you have a tied note that's slurring to another note, you want to have the slur start on the first note. So basically both notes of a tied note are in the slur. And then remember, for strings, slurs are an indication of bowing. So everything in one slur is in the same bow. And then for other instruments, the voice, harp, piano, percussion, slurs are just kind of phrasing marks to tell people, to let the informer know kind of what the phrasing is supposed to be. If you want to have a phrasing mark for a wind or a string, you can use the dashed slur to kind of if there's kind of a specific way that you want to kind of to have them phrase that. It's not something that you really see very often though. Also, all these tremolos, if you have a tremolo, that should be slurred, as well as generally grace notes are always slurred, unless you want them to be like ta-ka, ta-da, ta-da. You generally slur those, and then tremolos you would always slur. Okay, accidentals are another thing to just kind of go through and make sure that you've notated accidentals in a way that is clear. So for example, their kind of first rule of accidentals is that you want to notate it in a way that has as few accidentals as possible, right? So here I have E, E flat, E natural, right? I can notate this as D sharp, and now there's only one accidental instead of two here. Our second rule of accidentals is that intervals should look like what they sound like. For example, right, we have this A flat going to an F sharp, right? That sounds like a second. It's a major second, right? A whole step. So we want to make sure it looks like a whole step, right? This looks like a third. This is a diminished third, and it kind of looks like a third, but it sounds like a second, so it should look like a second. Here's another one, right? A flat to F sharp. You want to make that G flat. The reason for that is when you're playing an instrument, just like when you're singing, you have to hear the note before you play it. And in order to play the note in tune, they have to, for wind instruments, they have to set their embouchure in a way that will make sure that that note is in tune. If I'm hearing a third in my head, right, because this music is going by quickly, if I see this, I'm going to hear, oh, there's a third here. I'm going to set my embouchure so that I have a third. But actually, I play this note, I finger this note, and a second comes out. Then my embouchure was set for like this note, so it's going to end up being flat, and I will be out of tune. So it's not, the end of the world, but yeah, it's just generally you want to have intervals look like what they sound like. Our third rule of of accidentals is we generally don't want to mix flats and sharps if we don't have to. So actually, going back to here, and these rules, a lot of these rules kind of work together. So actually, it would be better to notate this both in sharps instead of both in flats. And this way, also, right, this interval, it sounds like a second, so it should look like a second ideally. And since this passage is all sharps, there's no reason to switch into flats. Sometimes if there's something really chromatic, you can mix flats and sharps. Sometimes it's kind of unavoidable, but most of the time, you can kind of either for a chord or kind of for a passage or a measure or a motive, you can stick with just either flats or sharps. Another thing to note is cautionary accidentals. So let's say that this was G flat and this was a G natural, right? So technically there's nothing wrong with this, right? Because this accidental only lasts for the rest of the measure. So this is a G natural. But, if there's not a lot of rehearsal time, a performer might accidentally play this as G flat. So what you can do is put in a cautionary accidental or a courtesy accidental. Okay, yeah, I guess I have to do it in the score first. So go to plugins, note beam, and rest endings. Go to cautionary accidentals. And then there's kind of different types here, which you can look at. The one that we're looking at is the courtesy natural. And I'm going to put a parentheses here to indicate that, that it's just kind of like, oh, just kind of a reminder. Because sometimes if there's not a parenthesis in different contexts, it can actually be a little bit confusing because like, oh, this was already supposed to be natural anyway. Was there supposed to be a sharp somewhere? So I generally put them in parentheses like that. Okay. So here now going back to the score, right? There's this kind of collision here. I'm going to use my trick of selecting the measure, pushing 4, and that unsmushes things. All right, we are very close. Next, I want to talk about page layout. Noticing a couple things here. Okay, so page layout, you can use the page layout tool in order to, I can move that over there. I can also spread these systems out a little more if I want. And I'm just clicking and dragging. The time that this becomes very relevant is for page turns. It is very important that you have doable page turns, right? You don't want to have like you can't have this, right? This is not cool. Well, one, because it's not necessary to have this on a second page, but let's pretend that, that you needed to have 2 pages, right? You can't have 0 time to turn pages. So you want to make sure that ideally every page will have rests at the end, either at the end of this page or the beginning of the next page, for them to either, flip the page or at least, have a second to kind of move their eyes. However, really the most necessary thing is that that if somebody were to print it out double-sided, that that every time that they have to flip, that there's rests on that page turn. So it ends up being kind of every other page turn. But you have to make sure that it kind of prints out that way, right? Because like if I have a page turn between pages 1 and 2, then when I'm printing it out, I have to make sure that this is page 1 of my document. If I decide that I want, there's no, let's say I had a part where there's really no good place to, there's no rests in the first two pages. And that means that I would have a good page turn at the end of the second page. Then what I would do is make sure that in my PDF, that page 1 was a title page. So if there was a title page and then kind of the page 1 of the music was on the same sheet of paper, so that when they go to print it out, all of the kind of the good page turns with rests happen where they actually have to turn the page. So that's why, yes, for some parts you'll want a title page. Also, later in the score, later in the part, sometimes you see just a blank page. Actually, this is in a piece that I'm rehearsing now for a gig next weekend. It'll say, this page left blank. This page intentionally left blank in order to facilitate page turns. I'll put that somewhere in the middle here. I don't know why it's not appearing, but that's neither here nor there. So that, this page is blank, so that then there's another 2 pages where they don't have to worry about a page turn. You can also, if you need to have a page turn in order to facilitate a page turn, if that means that, a page is you're only really using half the page, that's fine. Even if this page is only 4 systems, but if that's what you need to do in order to have good page turns, totally okay. You don't need to fill every page. All right, so now we've done everything we need to do. Our part looks pretty. There are no collisions. There's no weird smush notes. The systems have a good spacing of measures. All of our entrances have dynamics. All of our slurs are correctly done. All of our accidentals are correct. We have cautionary accidentals when we need them. If there's any changing of instruments, that's all labeled clearly. We have cues for any group of measures more than about 6 or so. We have rehearsal letters or numbers. We have multi-measure rests. The part is sized to 90%. It's not in concert pitch. Okay, so we're off to the presses. So we have to make sure that the part is the right size. So we select the page layout tool, go to the page layout menu, go to page size, and we want to make sure that technically in the professional world, parts should be 9 by 12. Right here, concert 9 by 12, but at this level, our printers do 8.5 by 11, so we're just going to select 8.5 by 11. Then we have to go to File and down to Page Setup and make sure that this is 8.5 by 11 as well. For the score, an orchestral score is going to be generally 11 by 17, or a wind ensemble score is 11 by 17. But for a smaller ensemble, a woodwind quintet, whatever, you can just leave it as 8.5 by 11. But for a larger ensemble, you're going to want to go to page layout for when you're editing the score and make sure that's 11 by 17. Okay, so then we go to print, and we're going to find our clarinet part here. I'm going to make sure that this paper size is 8.5 by 11. I don't exactly know what the difference between this is. Let's just go with the first one. Oh, and if this appears just like this, then just push show details to get this menu. And then go down to PDF, save as PDF. And then even if I just put my normal file here and save it, then it'll actually put in the title of the piece and then the clarinet part here. And then now here's a clarinet part as a PDF. And remember again, if it's a multi-page thing and you need the page turn to be between the second and third page, then here's where you would add a title page in order for the page turns to make sense. So, all right, and that is how you go from score to PDF of a part. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, email me, find me in class, come to my office hour. I've been working with Finale for about 20 years, so I will probably know most of anything that you need to do, or if I don't, I can usually find out reasonably quickly. So yeah, don't spend an hour trying to figure out how to do something, just send me an email. All right, thanks for watching and looking forward to seeing all your parts. Goodbye.